Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming out here. I'm just trying to travel the state to make sure people understand. There were some changes to the ID law for voting. The most important thing, though, I want you to remember, if you don't remember anything else I say, remember this. If you're a registered voter, you can vote. Don't let anybody confuse you. Don't let anybody dissuade you. On election day, if you're registered, you can go to your polling place and you can vote. The other thing I would mention is there may be some individuals here that use absentee ballots. Maybe they're going to be outside of the jurisdiction. Maybe you know individuals that for generally physical reasons they're on the permanent absentee ballot list because they just can't really get to the polling place. This doesn't change that at all. Okay? So if you're on that permanent absentee ballot list, you know someone that is, or you're going to be out of the jurisdiction, you're going to use that absentee ballot, this didn't change at all. Okay? The most important thing I want people to know, obviously I want to educate them about the law and the 3 different ways they can get the ballot. The most important thing I want people to know is absentees haven't changed, and if you are a registered voter, you can vote. Now, the only piece of bad news I have is if you're not registered to vote, it's too late to register to vote for the August election. If you're not registered to vote, we do have voter registration forms, and you can go ahead and register so you'll be ready for the next election. But unfortunately, the last day to vote for the August 8th election was July 12th. Now, when you go to vote, just as has always happened, you'll be asked to identify yourself. You'll walk up to that table and they'll want to know who you are so they can make sure that you're registered and you're at the right location. Because if you're not at the right location, your vote won't count. Okay, so that's why they're so worried. They check your address. Is this still your address? Is this the right polling location? They want to make sure that your vote will count. What you're going to be asked to show is your government-issued photo ID. That's what we're asking people to use. We want to move everyone to using that ID. It'll actually make the process faster with some of the technology we're starting to use. However, it's not the only way to get a ballot. If you don't have that ID with you, as long as you're registered and you haven't already voted absentee, you can still vote. And that's what we want everyone to know. We've had 2 elections under this law. Everyone that was registered was able to vote. We even had 3 people that showed up with no identification whatsoever. Now, I think they did that on purpose, but the system is designed so that if you're registered to vote, we can make sure you get to vote, and those 3 people actually got to vote, and their votes counted. Before this law went into effect, if you could not prove your identity, you would not be allowed to vote. Yes, sir. The question is, can I use my voter registration card to vote? Is that restating it so everybody can hear it? You actually can. Now, there's a secondary step you have to take, and I'll get to that in a minute. We would like you to use that Missouri driver's license, unexpired driver's license, non-driver's license, passport, or military ID. If you use that government-issued photo ID, which we want, you're just going to sign that poll pad, and then they're going to give you your ballot or send you to the machine if you use the electronic one. And then what you do once you get access to the ballot is, well, it's your business, not mine, right? I hope you'll vote it. I want everyone to come out and vote, but that's up to you. Now, here's the second part. Here's really directing to your first question, sir. If you don't have that government-issued photo ID, we want you to use that. We'll be happy to get you one. And I'm glad to see our county clerk here. I'm sorry. Did you just show up, or were you here and I completely missed you?
I just got here.
I'm sorry. Well, thank you for being here. If you don't have that government-issued photo ID, you can still go ahead and use that voter registration card. And maybe this is a longer way to put it than we should have. You can use your ID from a university, college, vocational, or technical school that's physically located in Missouri. When we wrote this, we thought we were trying to make it as short as possible. We said just a Missouri university, but then we thought maybe someone would say that it has to be University of Missouri Columbia, University of Missouri Kansas City, something like that. That's not what it means. It has to be that institution of higher learning that's based in Missouri. You can also still use that utility bill, that bank statement, that government check, paycheck, or other government document showing your name and address. Every form of identification that you've been able to present to workers at the poll before this law went into effect is allowed under either 1 or 2. The best thing that I would suggest for someone that's over the age of 70, or it's at 70 or older, is if you have a Missouri non-driver's license and you're above the age of 70, then it never expires. Because the thought is,
What's a non-driver's license?
it's a government-issued photo ID. You don't have to pass the driving test for it or the visual test. The idea is exactly what you brought up. There are some individuals that, as they get older, shouldn't be driving. My wife might suggest I've already reached that age. But because we want to make sure this non-driver's license that you get, it never expires after, I believe it's age 70. And for people that need a government-issued photo ID and don't have one, they want to be able to use that for voting, and I'll talk about that in a minute. What the state will provide for free for you will actually be that non-driver's license, which will work for number one. But if you use one of these secondary forms of identification, you're going to show that identification, and then you're going to have to sign your signature, but there's going to be 3 statements that you're signing to. So listen very carefully. Unfortunately, you're not turning your house over to me or to your county clerk. Here are the 3 statements you're signing to when you get that signature. 1, under Missouri law, you're requested to use that government-issued photo ID to drive. Well, that's not an opinion. That's just a statement of law. Number 2, you don't have that government-issued photo ID. That's why when we asked it for you, you said, well, all I have is my voter registration card. And then number 3, which I think is the most important statement you're signing to, it says that you know under Missouri law, the state will provide you with a free government-issued photo ID that you may use for the purposes of voting if you don't have it. Statements of the law. You sign that statement, and what happens? You just go ahead and, well, I don't say you go ahead and vote, that's your business. You get a ballot just the same as you would under 1 or 2. If you're getting a paper ballot, it comes from the exact same stack as an individual that had shown that government-issued photo ID. The idea here is we want to push you to using that government-issued photo ID. We want to have a record of people that don't use it so we can reach out to you, because if you do sign that statement, you're going to get at least one more piece of mail than you would have normally gotten, and it's going to be a letter from the Secretary of State's office asking you to allow us to help you get that photo ID. We're going to need your help because we're going to need some information from it. If you don't have that driver's license, non-driver's license, there's probably a reason for that. Maybe the courthouse where your birth certificate was in was flooded. We had a flooded courthouse earlier in Missouri this year. Maybe it burned down. Maybe you were born at home and you weren't given a birth certificate. The first time that you were found is when it was a census worker came by, and then 5 years later they said, oh yeah, Tom was born 5 years ago, put him down. There's probably something that makes it difficult for you to get an ID if you don't have one. Now, if you have all of the documentation, which could just be as simple as a birth certificate and proof of residency, and you want to go ahead and get that driver's license, go down to the fee office and do it yourself and tell them you'd like to get that free government-issued photo ID for the purposes of voting, you can do that. My guess is there's something more you need to do. It's more difficult, otherwise you don't already have it. You have transportation issues, you don't have the documents. Call us. Let us help you with that. We've been appropriated funds from the legislature. We've set up agreements with the Department of Revenue, Vital Records. We've reached out to other states and to other secretaries of state that have implemented this. I mean, if you like to sit on hold and try to find the right person at state agencies across the country or state departments to hunt down your documents, it's a free country, you're allowed to do that. But if you'd like to allow someone else to find those documents for you, give us a call. 866-868-3245. We can get those underlying documents that are necessary for your ID for free. Some people don't have the funds to pay for them, or else they just can't even find where they are. We'll do that. The Department of Revenue will give you that ID for free. We've been empowered by the legislature by law. We've provided budget funds to not only make sure that the Department of Revenue provides that ID for free for you, but those underlying documents, birth certificates, could be a marriage certificate. There are other documents that are included in that you might need to prove your identity. The idea is, if you don't have this government-issued photo ID and you want to have one for voting, the state is going to get you one. And you know, a lot of the discussion about this law has been about what's required to go ahead and get a ballot. I'll talk about that in a little bit more in just a second. But I think the most overlooked portion of this law is there are people that don't have that government-issued photo ID. There are reasons they don't have it. There are things they cannot do as a member of society or our community because they don't have that ID. And we're going to make sure they have them, because we want to bring them more into our society, more into our community, so that they have every right and privilege as someone else does that has an ID like that. And I think it's overlooked that for some individuals, this is going to be a real benefit. And I'm really proud that Missouri is making sure that we provide those for individuals. Now, if you look at these, and we've looked at two ways you can get a ballot. Those first two include every piece of documentation that you would have turned over prior to this law. Under the prior law, if you could not prove your identity, you would not be allowed to vote. Under this law, you were allowed to vote a provisional ballot. And this provisional ballot is going to have a blue envelope. In Missouri, there are actually two types of provisional ballots that may be at your polling place. This blue envelope is required for all public elections. We've never had these provisional ballots before. These are entirely new. There is another type of provisional ballot which we call the federal provisional ballot. You may have seen those or heard about those before. They were required by the federal government in federal elections. Federal provisional ballots were for individuals that proved their identity but could not prove that they were registered. They couldn't find them in our statewide registration system. They couldn't find them in the books. And what we said was, you know what? I can't come back on Wednesday morning and say, you're right, you should have been able to vote if I turned you away on Tuesday, right? It's too late. But those federal ballots did nothing for people that couldn't prove their identity. And they weren't required at every public election. These new provisional ballots are going to be required in every public election. They are for individuals that are registered, because you have to be registered to vote. That hasn't changed at all. But cannot prove their identity with documentation. And what they're allowed to do is they fill out that provisional ballot, they sign that provisional ballot, and there are two ways it can count. One, I think it's virtually never going to happen, but it can. If you have time to come back to the polling place after you voted that provisional ballot on the day of polling, you may provide your government-issued photo ID. If you do go back to the polling place after voting a provisional ballot, you can use that government-issued photo ID to prove your identity. But more than likely, you're not going to have time to do that. If you'll remember, I said that you have to sign this. Actually, in all three of these, you sign it. But with the provisional ballot, if you do not go back to the polling place, once the polls close, they take all the ballots back to their central location for counting. They're going to look at these provisional ballots, and they're going to match the provisional ballots, and then they're going to pull up the registration cards for the people that voted those provisional ballots. And they're going to match the signatures. The exact same thing we do for initiative petitions and referendums. The law was actually strengthened because there's been concern that federal provisional ballots weren't always counted. There's some misunderstanding about that. But the legislature, with regard to these, what I'll call lack of identification provisional ballots, mandated that they be counted once the identification is confirmed. We want everyone to know that if you're a registered voter, you can vote. The most important question about all of this is, are you a registered voter? If you're not, you don't get to vote. We'll get you registered. We're happy to help you get registered, but under law, you have to be registered. But what I want you to realize is, if you are a registered voter, every path ends with proceed to vote. Maybe I should say get your ballot, because whether or not you actually voted is your business, or how you do it. Do you have that government-issued photo ID? Yes. I don't. Do you have one of the following? Yes. Sign a statement, vote. No. Receive a provisional ballot and vote. Don't be fooled. Don't be dismayed. Don't be dissuaded from voting. Your voice counts. It's important. The more people we have from every walk of life, from every point of view, the better off we are at finding the best solution. It's true. We need people looking at everything from different views. Your vote will count. We want you to vote. Previously, if you couldn't prove your identity, you weren't allowed to vote. And we said, you know what? Let's make sure that everyone, as long as they're registered, can vote. So this is our way of saying, you know what? Even if you have no way to prove your identity other than your signature, we're going to let you vote. But if you're concerned about your signature not matching up, go ahead and you can go ahead and change your registration to update that. But previously, I want you to realize, if you couldn't prove your identity, you weren't even allowed to vote at all. So we're actually expanding ballot access because everyone that's registered should have the opportunity to vote now. Whereas before, if you couldn't be identified or something, you were out of luck.